Hey everyone, talking about the FCC today. So while we're in this radio production section of the course, it wouldn't do us any justice to get through it and not have a short discussion about the FCC. The FCC, or the Federal Communications Commission, is the regulatory entity in the United States that is concerned with things that go on the radio, amongst other things, of course. And we'll talk more about that stuff. But it's an essential conversation that we need to have in regards to radio and radio production, what is allowed, what isn't, what to be careful about, and some of the specifics of these rules and historical context as to why these rules were set up in the first place, and then an examination of, well, do these rules really even apply anymore, and why do we still adhere to them? This is a little disclaimer for today's lecture, is that in order to talk about the things you're not supposed to talk about, we have to say them out loud. So there's going to be some profane language with today's lecture. If that frightens you, you'll kind of know when it's coming anyway, so you can fast forward or whatever, but you've got to kind of know these things. So without further ado, a little overview of what the FCC is all about, and who better to do that than Peter, Stewie, and Brian Griffin, right? Well, I guess apparently that's after this slide. Okay, general information about the FCC, independent agency of the U.S. government that regulates radio, TV, wire, satellites, and cable, amongst other things even. We're going to go more in depth into this, but really they're concerned with the technical aspects of the broadcasts and also the content. Formed in 1934 as a replacement for the Federal Radio Commission. So a little bit of the historical context is that when radio first started, they just had a different name for the group that was collectively sort of overseeing things, and their roles definitely changed in 1934 when they created the FCC as a replacement. So they had different sort of things that they were looking into at that point. And the FCC is funded by broadcasters themselves. So the annual fees that a radio station has to pay in order to have a license and have a legitimate frequency to broadcast on costs money. And that money funds the FCC. And the FCC fines radio stations for not following the rules. So there's this vicious cyclical sort of setup between broadcasters and the FCC, where we're paying them to oversee things, but then they might charge us additional money because they oversaw us. That's sort of a conundrum. Okay, here's the video I was talking about with Peter, Stewie, and Brian. Let's look.
The side boob hour? Peter, that's it. I asked you to stop this and you didn't listen to me. I'm sorry.
All right. Pretty silly interpretation there, but Peter Griffin is not too far off on some of the stuff that they're talking about and the examples that they're giving. So the FCC, at least from the Griffin perspective, is just preventing you from doing things. And that is the case in some instances. But they're also overseeing and regulating a lot of things that, besides content, that maybe we're not thinking about, that's worth exploring here. So a little bit more about the jurisdiction of the FCC. Yes, broadcast radio stations and television stations are the main area in which the FCC has jurisdiction. But also telecommunications. If you look on the back of your phone, you're going to see the little FCC logo, because all those wireless devices, all of those types of things need to be approved by our government and sanctioned so that they are, basically been put through the test that they're not going to interfere with any other telecommunications issues or anything else that the FCC might be concerned with, right? You don't want to receive a text message and open your neighbor's garage, for example. And those types of things are going to be on the list too. So anything that uses a radio frequency in its product, like a garage door opener or a remote-controlled car, something like that, drones, right? Anything like that is going to have, some sort of regulation from the FCC and its stamp of approval on its manufactured item. So you'll find that FCC logo in lots of places now that you're looking for it. Okay, in addition, obviously the television stations, there's been lots of content over the years that has been censored by the FCC, or stations that have been fined, or live events that have aired on either TV or radio stations that the FCC has gotten involved in. Now, satellite and TV radio, their jurisdiction is different here. So satellite radio is a different animal because you pay a subscription for it, right? It's not free like traditional radio or television. So the FCC has complete jurisdiction over content, and you have to adhere to their regulations for broadcast stations. But if you're a satellite provider, then your actual gear, the equipment used for the product, will have to be approved by the FCC. Back to the remote control car example. But the content is not in the jurisdiction of the FCC because you have to pay for a subscription to have, say, Sirius XM radio. So if you're paying for that, then that's a private service that you're getting from Sirius XM. They are not regulated. Just like, any pay-per-view content, that you're paying for, streaming services, that content that comes through is no longer under the jurisdiction of the FCC because it's not free and open to the public. Okay, and the FCC is trying to always wiggle their way into regulating the internet as best they can. Fortunately, they haven't really been able to do so very much. Now, a requirement that the FCC says every radio station must have is what's known as a public file, and it's basically a collection of important documents that is available to the public at any given time. All right, and that public file must be accessible to members of the public during business hours during the week, right? So Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, anybody from the community must be allowed to walk into a radio station and demand to see the public file, to see the contents that are inside. And that has happened. Believe it or not, there are people in the community that will do that type of thing. You never know who's listening and how passionate they might be for or against whatever it was that was broadcast. And the FCC says that this has to be available. And now, just in the past 2 years, the FCC has also said that the public file has to be available electronically. So outside of these hours, we post our public file on the larger BG Falcon Media website page. So this content is accessible electronically, but it's only recently that we've moved that direction. And you'll notice that that's a common thing with the FCC is that we move very sluggishly to adapt rules, make adjustments to the way things are done. It takes forever. So items that need to be included in the public file. Exciting stuff. Your political file. That means that if you have a member of public office, say there's an election coming up, and you invite people that are running for local government office to be on the program, to share their thoughts and to ask questions, do interviews and things like that. You have to keep track of who accepts, who is coming in and participating in those things, because we want to be able to show that we're not biased in any sort of way. Now, does that mean that we're not allowed to have the Republican candidate in if the Democratic candidate is not available? No, we just have to be able to prove, based on the documents contained within our political file in the larger public file, that we've extended the offer to everyone. So we can't just only invite the Democrat to support those views or something. We have to at least be able to prove that we sent the offer out to everyone equally, and that maybe the Democrat was the only one that accepted, and that's fine, and that's how it should be, right? Free choice and stuff like that. But we have to be able to cover ourselves and our basis that we extended the invitation to everyone. We also have to have information regarding our equal employment opportunities, right? What are our rules and guidelines about who we have working at this radio station? We have to be able to say, well, we are following these guidelines. That's making sure that there's equal employment opportunities for everyone, and we're not discriminating based on age or gender or race or anything like that, right? Religious affiliation, any of those kind of issues, we need to say, well, hey, we keep this equal employment opportunity information inside our public file because we adhere to it, right? A list of programs that are on, and that can be more challenging for some stations than others, right? So we have to say at what time of day are we doing what kind of activity on the air? And for a college radio station like us, that tends to change very frequently. We'll have a turnover in the students that are doing different things, and their programs that they have chosen to, broadcast will not remain consistent. They'll change. A different student will take that time slot and will do something completely different with it. That's not always the case. For example, we've always had a long-running news program called The Sit Down, and that show and that style of that program will get passed on from student to student as long as there's someone that wants to, do that news-oriented type of programming. We just have to keep a list of this so it's available for people to see. EAS logs. EAS stands for Emergency Alert System. So you've heard this stuff before. This is only a test. Right? Sounds like 90s internet, which maybe you're familiar with, maybe not. Right? Dial-up internet kind of stuff. The Emergency Alert System is either initiated by a radio station or repeated by a radio station. And the difference is, the only way I can think to put this is, in the event of a zombie apocalypse, if the zombie apocalypse begins in Bowling Green, Ohio, which I imagine that if there is a zombie apocalypse, this is where it will begin, then WBGU will be first on the list to actually transmit the emergency alert. Okay, so we're initiating it. And then that gets passed on to other radio stations in different areas across the country to repeat that signal that, hey, there's a national emergency. There's a zombie apocalypse. Right. Most of the time, when you hear this happening at our radio station, first of all, when it happens, it just happens. It takes over everything that we're doing. If we're like in the middle of an interview or we had a song playing or whatever, all of a sudden this is just going to, without warning, start happening. So you just sort of have to sit back and let it run and do its thing and then keep a log of when it happened and how long it lasted, those kind of things. That's what the log part is. But if the zombie apocalypse started in California, then we would be a repeater station. The information would eventually get to us and we would start sharing the emergency alert as well, but it wouldn't be initiated by us. So that's the difference. Transmitter readings need to be in the public file too. This is technical information about our tower, right? And in the case of WBGU, that is actually situated on top of the administration building, the tallest building on campus. So it's about 10 stories high up there. We've got a tower on top transmitting 1,000 watts of power. We need to be able to keep track of all the technical information about that transmission. How many watts are being used? How far is it reaching? Is it working? Is it not working? And basically that is it's our responsibility to keep an ongoing record of whether or not our transmitter is doing what we say it's going to be doing. Because we could broadcast at a higher wattage, and we could increase the distance of our radio station, but that would go against what we're licensed to do. And it would also potentially start to overlap other radio stations in nearby communities, right? Because if we are, mandated to have 1,000 watts of power, that means we have a certain amount of distance, and then after that, 88.1 frequency will begin to change from our content to somebody else's. If we increased our wattage, we would start to overlap, and then we would sort of, steal somebody else's, the area in which the broadcast is heard. We'd be stealing it from other people. So that's what the FCC is concerned with, along with the map of the area in which you're broadcasting to. For example, our broadcast radius is not a perfect circle. We actually tend to broadcast a little bit further to the south. So we have to keep a topographical map, right? Like an overview of the community and show like where our primary listening radius is, secondary, and so on. So all this has to be available to the public. Business hours if they want to physically come in and take a look at it, and then, it has to be available all the time electronically. Moving on to call letters and a legal ID. So you've probably heard this stuff before, but maybe never thought or cared to know why the importance of these things. So the legal ID is something that the FCC says has to be repeated at the top of every single hour, every day, forever. And the legal ID includes the call letters and the city of license. Sometimes the HD information, and we'll get to that in a second. So for WBGU, call letters, WBGU, obviously, and then Bowling Green is our city of license. So a lot of times we try to spice that up with all that station imaging and branding and positioning stuff that we talked about, and that's fine, and that's how it's done most of the time, but you just can't interrupt that information. So WBGU Bowling Green has to be uninterrupted. Then you can do whatever you want on either side of that information to make things sound interesting or match your station personality. The HD information comes in if your radio station takes advantage of HD technology, which most stations do not. I'll bet most of you don't even know if you have HD radio in your car. It's sort of a technology that came out after it might have been interesting, so most people don't know or care about it. But in large markets, radio stations use HD channels to have additional content. So let's say in the Chicago area where I'm from, there's a radio station called WKQX, and it's the alternative rock radio station. Right, and it's like a landmark radio station. It's been that way for decades. Now, WKQX Chicago is the legal ID. But since they make use of HD information, they have to say WKQX HD1 Chicago, because that's their primary HD content. If you can think, like, when you're watching normal broadcast television and you like are watching the Fox channel and you keep hitting like the up or down button or something, you might get like little sub channels with additional content on it. That's what HD radio does. And major market radio stations will do that to provide very specific niche content. So if WKQX HD1 Chicago is the alternative rock station with a general alternative rock format, then its HD subchannels like WKQX HD2 Chicago or HD3 Chicago might be 80s new wave alternative or just 90s grunge alternative, right? Which is very specific stuff. And you would have to have a specific HD radio receiver in order to be able to make sense out of that content, and most people don't even know if they do or not. So it's sort of a wasted technology, but you should know of its existence. Another fun fact is that any radio station west of the Mississippi, the call letters begin with the letter K. And if you're east of the Mississippi, then you start with the letter W. That's just how it's always been and how it's always will be. There are a few exceptions that have been grandfathered in before the rule, and that goes with the number of call letters too. Generally, call letters are 4 letters long, but there are a couple of exceptions, especially in the Chicago area. I can think of WGN, where the Cubs broadcast, and WLS. Those were grandfathered in, again, before the rules took place, and they've never lapsed or been late for their licensing. So if they forgot to renew their license at some point, then they would lose the opportunity to have those call letters, and likely somebody else would swoop in and take them. So then they would have to come up with new call letters, and they'd be stuck going with the 4 letters. Okay. So that's all the information about legal IDs and call letters. Moving on to some more legal stuff, the FCC is concerned with 2 things known as plugola and payola. So plugola is endorsing a product or service for personal gain, and payola, the difference, accepting payment for the broadcast of material presented as being normal. Okay, let's dive into this and figure out the difference between the two. Plugola, if you're endorsing a product or service for personal gain, that means I, the DJ, am going on the radio station and talking about how great the new Big B's pumpkin spice latte is because every morning they give me one. Right? Not the listeners, not the radio station, it's personal gain. It's just for me. And payola, accepting payment for the broadcast of material presented as being normal, you may, as a listener, you may not realize that you're hearing music specifically because those record labels paid the DJ money to have them be played. This was a big practice at the very beginning in the early radio days, with like jazz and blues sort of material, right? The record labels would put some money under the table for the DJ, and that DJ would choose to spin those records, right? And thereby affecting sales of those records too, because at the time, that was the only way that people were being introduced to new music. So it was a very powerful thing to have control over as a DJ and had a lot of value. Now, we've reduced the amount of plugola and payola incidents that there are, mainly because the FCC is looking out for this kind of stuff, right? I said before that the FCC is funded all by radio station fees. So the radio stations are paying fees to support the FCC, and the FCC is supporting those radio stations that pay them the money by looking out for this sort of stuff and taking action on it. So it's like protection for the radio station itself against its own employees, against its own DJs. So the FCC is looking out for this stuff to protect its radio station and the people that are funding them. Now, there's not a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, there's like legal ways around this too, I guess is what I want to say. Is now plugola still exists, but it's not really personal anymore. That's what makes it legal. The gain is for the radio station, right? So, and going back to the Big example, Big might be a sponsor or an advertiser at the radio station, in which case it might be part of the deal that we strike. Not only do they get 30-second commercials run throughout the day, but they also, the DJs are going to make mention of how delicious their products are and how they always have some. That's part of the deal. So that's not personal gain anymore. That's still the radio station gaining from the monetary value that Big B was willing to pay for all that, right? And payola hardly ever happens now because radio stations are strictly overseen by program directors who are people that work for the radio station that decide what goes on the air. As far back as 2005-ish, when I'm working in radio, there was, even then, already, I never once had the choice of what song I was going to play. So there was no option for me to accept money from a record label to play a song, because if it wasn't on my list, I didn't play it. It was already decided for me. Even the all-request retro lunch from 11:30 to noon every day was already predetermined. So even when people called and said, hey, I request this song, I'd be like, cool, we'll put it on the list. But I already had the list and I knew what I was going to play, right? Okay, moving on. I'm going to skip this video about payola. Obscenity and indecency. This is the FCC regulating content. And it's a challenging conversation to understand, but you need to be presented with it, okay? So obscene content must meet these three things. It must appeal to an average person's prurient interests, depict sexual conduct in a patently offensive way, and lack serious artistic, political, or scientific value. If it does all three of those things, the material is considered obscene by the FCC and is therefore never acceptable, ever. Okay? Obscene material, no bueno, ever. And there's a difference. Indecent content portrays sexual or excretory organs in a way that does not qualify as obscene, so does not meet those three other things. I wanted to go back to that. So it's worth talking about a little bit more, because one of the serious issues with this is who decides what lacks serious artistic, political, or scientific value. Who does that? Is it me, the FCC, your grandma? Because those people are going to have different opinions. So I guess what I'm saying here is that this is a very subjective. Extremely subjective. And there is, disputes that go on all the time about, well, actually that is artistic, right? Just because it portrays sexual or excretory organs doesn't mean that it doesn't have scientific or artistic value, right? So it would be, therefore, become indecent instead of obscene. And indecent material is okay some of the time. Obscene material is okay none of the time. Okay, so it wouldn't be a talk about the FCC if we didn't watch the classic George Carlin comedy bit about the 7 dirty words you can't say on radio or television. So we're going to watch that, and this is where things will get a little profane, all right? So if you don't like the bad language, then skip ahead. But this is a classic bit, and you kind of got to know what's happening here.
Sometimes, well, hell yeah. Sometimes it's okay, but not all the time. And they're the only words that seem to have that restriction. I mean, there are a lot of words you can say whenever you want, you know. Pneumonia! Nobody gives you a lot of... All right, you can't yell it in the hospital a great deal, but what the hell? There are words that you can say, no problem. Topography! No one has ever gone to jail for screaming topography. But there are some words that you can go to jail for. There are some words that we just have decided we will not say all the time. Sometimes, okay. If you're running through the jungle chasing somebody that we're at war with, you can holler them. If you're shooting a criminal, it's okay. It's the all-American thing. Dirty fucking crook. But if you're with the bishop's wife at lunch, it's better not to ask for the goddamn lettuce. You know what I mean? It's just like we've decided there'll be some words we won't say all the time. And I was just trying to find out which words they were. For sure. All of them. I wanted a list. Because nobody gives you a list. That's the problem. They don't give you a list. Wouldn't you think it'd be normal if they didn't want you to say something to tell you what it is? Nobody even tells you when you're a kid what the words are that you're supposed to avoid. You have to say them to find out which ones they are. Shit! Oh, fuck! That's two. Oh, Ma, that's enough trial and error, huh? Please, Ma, give me a list, huh? All right, you're 6 years old now, and here's the list of words your dad and I don't ever want to hear you say. Oh, hey, thanks, Ma. Boy, that's going to save me an ass kicking or two. Yeah, you never know what's going to be on the list. Because it's always somebody else's list. You didn't make that up. Somebody told you that shit. They told you, better not say that. So you gotta... And you don't know what's going to be on their list. God, people's lists even change from day to day. Some people on Friday night got a list, you know, about 2 or 3 words. Sunday morning, goddamn, there's 27 words on it. These are the same people 2 days later. Different list. So you got to kind of watch out what you're going to believe from them. The trouble is, I was trying to find out what these words might be. And I wanted to know the ones that you could never say on television. I mean the filthy words that are always filthy. There are a lot of these little two-way, double entendre words that have 2 meanings, words that are okay part of the time. I call them like part-time filth. Some of these words, they're only 50% dirty. You have words like ass. Ass is hardly even a dirty word anymore, but it has a few meanings that you can't say on television. That's what I was talking about. What can you say on television? That's another one of those places where we can't use these words all the time. But some of them are all right some of the time. Ass is all right on television. You can say on television things like, well, you've made a perfect ass of yourself tonight. But you can't say, hey, let's go get some ass. Bitch. Bitch is another word like that. Same kind of word. It's only dirty part of the time. Depends on what you mean by bitch. You might be the lady from the San Diego Zoo visiting one of the Tonight shows, and you might just have a bunch of little canines with you there. One of them is a female. You say, there's the bitch, Johnny, and it's okay, fine. Just don't refer to the singer the same way. That's all. Is that bitch going to do another number? Yes. Animals are fine on those two-way words, and that's it. That's what I was trying to find. The words that were always dirty, not just part of the time, but completely filth. Well, in looking for these words, I kept finding new categories. We have so many ways of describing these dirty words. Well, we have more ways to describe dirty words than we actually have dirty words. That seems a little strange to me. It seems to indicate that somebody was awfully interested in these words. They kept referring to them. They called them bad words, dirty, filthy, foul, vile, vulgar, coarse, in poor taste, unseemly, street talk, gutter talk, locker room language, barracks talk, bawdy, naughty, saucy, raunchy, rude, crude, lewd, lascivious, indecent, profane, obscene, blue, off-color, risque, suggestive, cursing, cussing, swearing, and all I could think of was shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. That's all I had. Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. That was my original list. I knew it wasn't complete, but it was a starter set, you know?
All right, I'll stop it there. So, obviously, this guy's a comedian, and he's trying to have fun, but this has actually been well regarded as an important landmark in regards to sort of blowback with the FCC. So this still holds true today. And it's interesting that he talks about the double entendre stuff, you know, based on what we learned about obscenity and indecency. And even the Stewie Griffin video that was at the beginning, you know, you can use certain words certain ways. For example, depending on the time of day, you can refer to being pissed off, but not that you have to take a piss, right? Because one is excretory in nature and might lack serious scientific or artistic value. So that's where, you know, the word itself isn't the problem, it's the way that it's being used. So there's these gray areas that make things challenging. Now, this is normally the point where I have everybody collectively say the 7 dirty words. So I'm just going to assume that you're talking along with me, and I'll say them for you. Shit. Fuck. Piss. Cunt. Cocksucker. Motherfucker. And tits. Nice job, everyone. You did the most awkward thing you'll ever have to do in a class, probably. Congratulations. So stay away from those words with any of your radio station production related stuff. But back to the idea of indecency. So if some of that material is okay some of the time, where it's indecent instead of strictly obscene and forbidden. Safe harbor is a time of day where the rules about indecency are a little bit more relaxed, basically. So we may not have to worry too much about that usage of the word piss at a specific time of day, and that is specifically 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And the reason why is because, again, if this is free, available to the public content on radio or television, the assumption is that kids are in bed at this time, right? So we can be more relaxed about indecency, because as long as there's artistic or scientific value, then it's okay to broadcast it, but you're going to receive a little less maybe communication from the public about their hatred for the content or something if you air it during this time when kids aren't present. So that's important. So making the assumption that children aren't listening during that time, and we can be a little bit more relaxed about our indecent content. And you'll notice this stuff if you listen to your favorite radio stations, that after a certain time of day, the personality or the edginess of the humor will sort of be more relaxed or more intense, actually. So anyway, some specific things that we have to worry about as a nonprofit student-run radio station. As a nonprofit station, we do not advertise, we underwrite. And what that means is that local businesses, much like ones that would advertise in a more traditional commercial radio station, they sponsor our programming in return for mention of their business and what they do and where they're located. What's different is that we're not allowed to use calls to action, make qualitative statements, or mention cost. Right? So we have to be able to act like advertising as best we can without doing any of these things. There's even more specific rules, but let's jump into these. Calls to action. The get yours right now. No, we can't do that. Come on down. No. So anything that it's encouraging our listeners to go and participate in whatever it is we're talking about, we're not actually supposed to be doing that. We're also not allowed to make qualitative statements, which, back to my favorite Big B example, if Big B was an underwriting sponsor, we could say things like, this hour of content on WBGU is brought to you by Big B Coffee, located on Wooster Street and offering fresh coffee and yada yada, right? And we could say the phone number or something. But the qualitative statement would be like, the best damn coffee in town, right? And it doesn't have to have a curse word in it, but it's just qualifying it with saying that it's the best, or if we say that it's better than somebody else. Those are qualitative statements that we have to stay away from, because we'd cross the line into advertising at that point. We're also not allowed to mention cost. And yes, free is a cost. So we can talk about things and we can say that they're available for purchase. We can lead people to where they could go. We could provide the information to say tickets are available for purchase at this website, which means that we've given the information as to where they can get make the purchase, and that it does have a cost, but we didn't mention what the cost was, and we didn't urge them to go to the website. We just said that it's available there. That's the difference. Okay, one of the last things that I wanted to talk about is the hoax broadcast, and this would fit right in nicely with the documentary type projects that we're doing sometimes, is that the FCC regulates and prohibits broadcasting false information concerning crimes or catastrophes if you know the information is false and you know it's going to cause public harm. Okay? You're protected from broadcasting false information if you're just ignorant and you didn't have any idea. That's okay. But if it can be proven that you knew the information was false and that you knew that it was going to cause harm to your local community, then you can be in trouble for a hoax broadcast, and the station can be fined, the individual can be fined and lose their job, all those kinds of things. The biggest example of this, of course, is the War of the Worlds broadcast in the 40s, when Orson Welles basically did an interpretation of the War of the Worlds book and did so in such a way that had never been done before and really confused people, and they thought that aliens were invading our world and were killing people and causing trouble. Nobody knew that it was a hoax. So he knew that the information was false. He did not reveal that, it was only at the very beginning he provided a disclaimer about, this is an interpretation of this story. But if you missed that, then you had 60 minutes of thinking that aliens were invading. And if radio is the only source of media at the time, you're going to tend to believe that, right? He may not have known that it was going to cause public harm, but that was probably in the realm of possibilities if you're broadcasting false information about aliens killing people. Okay, so hoaxes are not okay if you know the information is false or if you know that it's going to cause harm. That's it on the FCC. Congratulations, you made it through it. I'll see you next time.